All right, here we go. Welcome back in. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. I am Collin, joined today with Tyler. We kind of got out of the boring stretch of kind of like the football off season. It's still kind of in that season, but it now kind of feels like since we're into March, we got spring ball coming up here shortly, spring game next month, and then by then it's summer and it's going to be here before you know it. So we took a little bit of a break, but we are back now. We're going to have some episodes coming out here in the next few weeks. Starting today, we're going to kind of reflect back on the 2024 season. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time because frankly, it's 2025 now, right? Like it's the new season, but we're going to just kind of reflect back. And the reason why is because, and it kind of sets up for the bulk of this episode, which is talking more about kind of the state of the program. Are we in a healthy spot? And can we compete moving forward in this new Big Ten, right? Last year, we saw the 4 new teams come in. We saw Ohio State dominate. Penn State, look really good. Michigan, yes, they had a down year, but they're always going to be pretty good. Can Iowa compete and be kind of in that upper half, or are they going to settle for more of a mid-tier or lower half of the Big Ten? Let's first talk a little bit of the 2024 season, just kind of your overall thoughts of how it kind of played out.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a season of ups and downs. I mean, I think that 8-5 record kind of shows that, right? I mean, I think there was times where we looked really good, and there was times where, again, should have had a win here or there, and we didn't close the deal, or we just didn't look very good at all. So definitely, I think for me, given the expectation going into the year, I think we went into the year with high expectations, with the schedule that we had, with the guys we had coming back. I would say it's a little disappointing when you reflect on the overall season, but specifically, with the offense, I thought our run game was phenomenal. That's something that Tim Lester got us back on track to what we know how to do, and that's run the football, and made Caleb Johnson really, in my opinion, turn back the clock and look like what we thought he could be after his freshman year, right? Of having a really good freshman year. Ended up breaking Sean Green's touchdown record for a single season. So 21 touchdowns on the ground, 1,500 yards. After what we had seen the previous couple years under Brian Ferentz and not being able to even run the ball, I think that was refreshing to see under Tim Lester and in his scheme that he brought in. Passing game, though, needs a lot of work still. But I attribute that to really inconsistent quarterback play. And that's something that I think we've talked about now. I think Tim is, obviously getting ahead of that and getting rid of all those old quarterbacks and bringing in all the new ones.
Yeah.
Cade just isn't the guy that we thought he was. And that's where it starts. He just couldn't stay healthy. And I thought when he was out there, he was very inconsistent. Sullivan, same thing, right? A little bit. Like, as a starter for 4 quarters of a full game, roller coaster. Had really great moments and really poor moments. When he's in short yardage situations or he needs to scramble for a first down, he's phenomenal at that. That's what he's best at, I think. But it's situations, right? Situational football.
I'm just going to cut you off real quick, and then you can continue with Sullivan, though. I will say, like, the more I think about it, I really wanted Sullivan to succeed. Don't get me wrong, but like in the bowl game, it's probably kind of a blessing in disguise that he ended up like not being very good towards the back end of that game, because I really think after that game, it was like, we need to go out and get a quarterback. We need to go out and get a Mark Gronowski and fight like hell to get somebody like that. Because let's just face it, I just don't think Sullivan for a full year could be our starting quarterback. No. He just can't. And so it's probably kind of a blessing in disguise what happened in the Missouri game, where you just slowly that game, he just got progressively worse. Yep. And
same with UCLA game.
Yeah.
Started out on fire and we're like, holy shit. Couldn't miss. Throwing long bombs, right? Something we hadn't seen all year. And then, well, the other thing is, again, sort of injuries. He takes a huge shot and he doesn't look like the same guy. We've talked about that too. So, and you brought up a point about him at Northwestern. Like he was never the full-time starter at Northwestern, never really the full-time starter at Iowa. Does that, do they know something we don't? And maybe we saw that as it played out throughout the season, the more reps he got. So just overall inconsistent quarterback play was sort of the downer on offense, right? Yeah. The passing game. I think once that gets fixed, I think or improves with a guy like Mark Gronowski, another year under Tim Lester, the whole 9 yards, getting Sammy Phillips, getting the guys that Lester
That you
needs
need.
to succeed. I think that'll improve. That's more the offensive side. I'd say the defensive side real quick, just again, there was times where we were really good, but early on in the season we saw explosive plays being given up against Troy, against Iowa State.
Yep.
To come back and win that game.
That UCLA Iowa State one was...
Michigan State game, like the Michigan State game, the UCLA game, we couldn't stop. We couldn't stop anything. I mean, so it was but then there was times where we looked really good too. So it was just very inconsistent, and that's the word I use with the kind of this team overall this season. There was good and there was bad, and maybe losing a guy like Cooper DeJean and seeing what he did in the Super Bowl, maybe that was a little foreshadowing of what was to come with the defense, because we had a lot of guys return, but it definitely didn't feel the same. Yeah.
So. Well, losing him and this was something we talked about at the beginning of the year. I was a little worried about defensive line depth, right? Especially at the defensive tackle spot. And I think that didn't help us very much, because there were games where it's like, man, we're not getting a pass rush. And, we're relying on our corners that aren't very good to begin with, where if there's no pass rush, the quarterback's just sitting there for 5-10 seconds. Like, yeah, they're eventually going to get open. So that's stuff that, obviously needs to be addressed and needs to figure out. And I think going into this year, we already got 2 guys in the portal. Your hope is the 4 freshmen that came in last year, they all take that next step. And I'm really high on some of those guys where they're now sophomores. Can 1 or 2 of those guys take that next step, along with obviously bringing back some of the guys that we had in the portal players. So hopefully that gets addressed, because that's huge, right? Corners can be good and all, but like if you have a dominant defensive line, it helps a lot.
The secondary can only hold up for so long before somebody gets open, right? The offenses are designed to win eventually. So you're exactly right. There was a lot of times we talked about, man, we could not get there with 4 guys. What do? We bring a blitz, and then somebody's open in the secondary because they get it out quick. And so, yeah, you're right. That D-line depth will be a key.
So for me, like looking back at last year, I kind of categorized the schedule into 4 different categories. And what I mean by that is like, okay, so like the first category is like what teams are way above us in terms of talent, in terms of just depth, in terms of maybe coaching. And that team was Ohio State. So we go 0-1. Okay, that's fine. Like we figured going into the year,
predicted that. Yeah.
We're going to lose that game more than likely. Yes. Then reverse side, the next category is teams that we are way above, right? Like just in terms of talent, things like that. And that's Illinois State and Troy. We go 2-0. Good. Then I classify another category of even teams, like where are we even at? Minnesota, Washington, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa State. In terms of talent, just terms of experience, things like that. And I'm just talking a 1-year basis. I'm not talking a program in general. I'm just talking in 1 year. We go 4-1. Okay, that's not bad, right? 4-1 in those 5 games. Probably should have went 5-0. Should have beat Iowa State. This is where the problem lies, because then you have this other category where I believe, and I'm just talking 2024 season, we were the better team. Northwestern, UCLA, Maryland, Michigan State. And we go 2-2 in that category. And you might disagree with me. People might disagree with me, but I'm just talking in that 1 year time, we were the better team than those 4 teams. UCLA, Michigan State were bringing all new coaches in, all new players. We were a more experienced team. You look at like UCLA, for example, in terms of just physicality, like we should be the more physical team. Like we're just a better team. And we lost that game. Michigan State, same thing. Like we were the better team last year. Doesn't mean we'll be the better team this year when we play Michigan State. I'm just talking last year. And we go 2-2 in that category. Just can't let that happen. You got to go 4-0 there. If you're the better team, I don't care if you play on the road, you got to win those games. And so you look back at last year, you look at those 2 losses, and then you even look at the loss against Iowa State. I know it's kind of an even team, but when you're up 13-0 at half, you have them on the ropes. They're playing a bunch of young linebackers because they're half injured, and your running back is going off for you for 170 yards. You got to win that game. You got to figure out a way to win that game and go 5-0 in that category. And if you go 5-0 in that category and 4-0 in the other one that I just talked about, you're looking at an 11-1 season. similar to Indiana, where their only loss was Ohio State and they made the playoffs. So if we would have went 11-1, we probably would have made the playoffs. I mean, they would have probably had to figure out, okay, Indiana or Iowa, because I don't think both of us were going to go. But we might have had the better resume because of Iowa State having a good year. And that would have been a really good win, right? So that's where it's just like, for me, you look back on it, and that's where the disappointment lies, is because, man, you look at the schedule, there was only one team where I felt like, man, we're just outclassed, and that's Ohio State. Everybody else, we're either even or we're slightly above or way above. And we lost 3 games of that magnitude, where it's just like, man, what are we doing here?
I'm just thinking back to those three specific games. Iowa State offense actually comes out for, scores 13 in the first half, 13-0 lead, and then that's blown. Michigan State offense can't do shit. Defense was doing good. We could only do so much, hold up for so long. We blame the offense that game. UCLA, well, the offense, we start on fire. And we kind of blame the defense, right? Because the defense couldn't stop anybody either. So it's just and that's where I talk about sort of that inconsistency. It was just across the board, really. A lot of years past, obviously, with our defense, it was super easy to pick on the offense the whole time, right? This year, I mean, yes, passing game offense, there was times where, again, got to be way better, no doubt. Not taking, not blame, trying to, give them any less of the blame. But the defense this year too, I mean, it struggled at times.
So now that we are done with the season, we're now into March, season's past us, would you say we are in a healthy spot just as a program?
Yeah, I guess the way I would answer that is yes, I think we are. And I think it's possible for a team like Iowa to compete in the new Big Ten. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, we talked about it. An expanded playoff really only helps Iowa, doesn't hurt us, right?
Yeah.
If this was the 14 playoff going forward, I'd say we're screwed. We're SOL, because there's no room for error. Going forward, playoffs sound like they're going to keep expanding and expanding to more teams as the years go on, and so that leaves Iowa. Iowa can afford to lose a couple games, and so maybe that loss to Iowa State doesn't mean as much, going down the road. But that, along with NIL and transfer portal, I mean, I think if we utilize it correctly, and like we've seen us do so far, and go out and get the needs that we need, quarterback, wide receiver, stuff like that, we be aggressive in it, and as well as retain the players that I think are deserving of retaining, and we can do that. I think we'll be in a spot in the Big Ten that's already and it's going to be tough, but the SEC and Big Ten, you want to be in those conferences because
that's where
you have room for you have wiggle room, and so I think that's number one. Number two, I think going forward under Tim Lester, I have a lot more confidence that we're going to solidify the quarterback position and be better in that area. And that is the key, right? As much as we want to say, because this last year we had the schedule, right? We had the schedule we thought reporters were saying the same thing. Is this the year that Iowa makes the playoffs? Do they? It was kind of like
playoffs or bust type of thing. I know Scott Doctrine was talking about that.
Yeah. And so
I'm not making fun of him for saying that, because I kind of felt like that too going into the year. Bring back everybody on defense, schedule.
Exactly.
Why thought Cade was going to be better?
Because our quarterback situation is not good. Was not good. And it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do something about it. And Tim Lester has done something about it with Gronowski, Hank Brown, hopefully keeping Sullivan here. So I feel really good about that going forward under Tim Lester. And that gives me a lot of confidence that we can be better at that position and be good enough passing wise to win some more of these games that we should have won. That's where I think we are in a good spot. I feel a lot better under Tim Lester. I could say that.
I look at culture being maybe the biggest thing. I mean, for Iowa, we've always relied under culture under Kirk Ferentz, and you see that year in and year out since this kind of portal era, we're one of the few teams every single year. It's like clockwork where we just don't have many guys that leave. Right. I think this year we were tied for first, or maybe we were first I think Northwestern was number one. We were second or third in terms of the lowest amount of players that left in the portal. Now, things can change, spring portals, guys could leave too, but it goes to show the culture at Iowa. I think the way, and I know we just lost Ladell Betts, but the way that Kirk has been able to keep this coaching staff, and it is a bigger deal than I think most people think. When you got guys like Seth Wallace, Phil Parker, Kelvin Bell, like guys that could easily leave. And now you have like Tim Lester, who so far is looking the part. When you have a coaching staff like that around a head coach that just knows what the hell he's doing, yes, does he frustrate us at times? Of course he does, but let's face it, he knows what he's doing. That's a good thing to have, right? And so you got those two things. And then, when you look at like the money, okay, revenue sharing is going to be starting up here soon. And I know every team is going to be like this for Iowa, but to be able to say like, okay, $20.5 million, which that number is always going to go up. But for this first year, that's how much it's going to be. And if 75% or around 75% of that money goes to football, that's over $15 million going to football. Yep. And so that's a lot of money that you're going to be able to play around with. Now, we're still going to have the swarm. So, they're still going to have to rely on the average Joe to still donate some money, still rely on businesses to donate, big donors, because you need some of that back end money. And I feel like Brad Heinrichs is, he's done a remarkable job of building swarm, because you need some of that extra money where it's like, okay, hey, you're going to get the revenue sharing, but here's some money on top of that. Right. And I think we're in really good position for that as well. And Iowa's model so far, going back to kind of what I said with the culture, is we're still going to develop high school guys. We're going to find diamonds in the rough. We've always done it that way. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the roster, and Tyler Barnes, who's a great general manager for us, they look at the roster. Okay, we need, this hole. And you look at our portal every year, we don't get many guys, but we don't really need that many guys, right? Because a lot of guys stay. We feel good. We just need to get some guys, here, and there. And our model so far has been pretty good. And so that's where I think as of right now, Iowa is in a very healthy spot moving forward. Now, yes, will it be tough in this new Big Ten? Of course it is. When you factor in Ohio State, Oregon, and when you think about like last year,
surprise team like
Indiana. Yep. Or when you factor in like USC, Michigan, who had down years last year, but that's not always going to be the case, right? Like they're going to rebound eventually. Probably this next year. Like they'll probably be much better than they were last year. Illinois is starting to kind of rise, right? So the Big Ten is pretty tough, but I still think though Iowa is in good position because of what I all said. Now, how can Iowa separate themselves a little from the rest of the Big Ten? I'm not talking from the top of the group, the Oregons of the world, the Ohio States, because we're never going to separate ourselves from them, right? They're always going to be more talented than us and all that. They just have more resources, they're better programs. But how can we separate ourselves from the middle and the bottom of the pack in the Big Ten? Because that's the key. If you can separate yourselves from the middle and the bottom of the pack and be kind of on that top half, you're going to be able to compete for making the playoffs. Because if they start bringing 4 or 5 teams in the playoffs for the Big Ten, if you're kind of up in that half, you're always going to be right then and there. I'm not saying you're going to make it every year, but you might be pretty close, right? So,
I feel decent about that, because I feel like recently under Kirk, it's almost chalk up 8 wins a year, right? Now we just got to find a way to get to that 9, 10, just figure out a way to close the deal on a couple games, and we're right there.
Our average finish in the Big Ten in the last decade, so since 2015, without divisions, I'm just talking average finish, is actually 5.8. So that if you round that up, it's 6 in the Big Ten, that's kind of where I want to be at, right? Like if you can say especially in this new Big Ten, let's say you told me right now, like in the next decade, that's kind of where we're going to average. I would take that in a heartbeat, because I would tell me, okay, if we average around there most years, we're in that kind of second tier. And you never know at that point what we can do. Some years where we have an easier schedule, make the playoffs. And that's, obviously the goal. So how can we separate ourselves from the middle and the bottom of the pack? Okay, now obviously the obvious, and this is what we've been really good at for so many years, is defensive special teams, not turn the ball over, and instead forcing turnovers on you and then very little penalties. That is something that we've always been good at under Kirk Ferentz. This last year, we weren't very good in some of those categories, right? Turn the ball over, especially like 2 years ago with Deacon Hill. But for the most part, on average, we're consistently good in those three areas. Okay, that's the obvious. How do we, though, take that next step? And you mentioned this with Leicester. Getting quarterbacks, attracting quarterbacks, right? And it starts this year with Mark Gronowski. This is why I just hope he has a good year, because we got to get to the point where we can start attracting quarterbacks to come to Iowa. Hey, come to Iowa. Learn an NFL offense. Look at what we just did with Mark Gronowski. He started at South Dakota State, had a good, 4 years there. He came to Iowa, had a phenomenal year. Now he's off the NFL. He learned an NFL system. Tim Lester, he's really good at what he does. Come to Iowa, who has connections in the NFL. And at that point, you can start getting talented quarterbacks to come to Iowa, something that we have not had for a long time. And the reason why we have never taken that next step in the last decade is because, yes, we were good in everything else, but we were not good in that area. And that is what keeps the engine turning, right?
Yep.
And then everything else follows suit, right? If you get good quarterbacks to come to Iowa, you'll eventually get good wide receivers to come to Iowa. And then, if we keep having the run game that we have, we're always going to have decent running backs. We're always going to be pretty good at the offensive line because that's kind of Kirk's bread and butter. And there you go. You do what I just said with the obvious, and then you expand on what I just said. That is how you separate yourselves from the middle and the bottom of the pack.
Yeah. Yep. And, you hit the nail on the head. It's like you can be great in all the other areas. In football, look at the top teams in college or the NFL. They have one of the best quarterbacks leading that team, because the quarterback position is the most important position of all of sports. They are the engine that makes everything else go. And you can have a not so great defense, and they can carry that defense, right? Because they can score more points. And the defense can give up some touchdowns, but it doesn't matter because your quarterback, you have confidence that he can go win the game. Are we ever going to get the best quarterback? No, I don't believe that. Capable.
Yeah, and the thing is like, and I don't even think that we need to get the best, because you look at like this year's playoffs, was the quarterback from Notre Dame, was he some great quarterback? No, he was pretty good, right? Like, that is what we need. Is,
if you go back, it's the guys that are really experienced, that have played in a lot of games, are a lot of these guys that are being successful at the collegiate level, getting to a national championship. Riley Leonard from Notre Dame. Dylan Gabriel has played like 50-some games for Oregon. He made the playoffs, 12-0 Big Ten season. Curtis Rourke was a 4th or 5th year guy from Ohio, right? Like these are guys that have stuck around and are not just 1-year wonders.
Yeah.
So
you don't need to be like, oh my God, just unbelievable quarterback. You got to have, though, a decent quarterback, because that's something that we have not had. Right,
look at the top quarterbacks in the draft this year: Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. They didn't make the playoffs, right?
No.
If we're talking about getting a top draft pick, that's a completely different conversation than winning football games.
Yeah, so I just think, man, and this is why this year it's so important that Mark has a good year. We talked about this 2 years ago with Cade and how we're like, man, we really need this to seed, because we need to start getting quarterbacks to come to Iowa, but we need to have kind of a resume for that. You can't just keep wishing. Like, you eventually need it to like be there where people can see the example. It starts this year, and this is a huge year for Leicester to get this right with the passing game and get this right with Gronowski, because if you can do that, then moving forward, you can start recruiting guys pretty easily. Like, hey, come to Iowa. Like, look at what we just did with Mark. It's what I'm going to be able to do with you, whether that's through the high school ranks or whether that's through getting guys in the portal. But regardless, whatever you do, if we start having consistent quarterback play that's pretty good, and you pair that up with everything else, as long as there's no drop-off, which, maybe there will be in some categories, but I really feel like as long as Ferentz is here, we have the coaching staff that I just talked about, Seth Wallace, Kevin Bell, Phil Parker, guys on the offensive side of the ball. I think we can do it. It's just, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not saying we will do it, but I think we have the capability to do it.
kind of like this year when you get Mark Gronowski, what follows? Well, then this wide receiver
Sam
from
Phillips.
Chattanooga wants to come. And so that's the key. You're right. That's the key. It's the quarterback position going forward, solidifying that, being way better than we have been. I mean, and that's what sucks is Brian. I mean, I'm not trying to throw shots here, but he dug us such a hole, and it's tough to come out of. But I do have confidence in Tim to do this. So,
and we knew it was going to take a while. That's why last year, and remember how many people were getting mad at us because we were negative before the season started. But we were just like, it's going to take a while. Brian put us so far in a hole that you can't just like dig ourselves out of it very quickly. Like, it's going to take time. Like, Lester has a big problem to solve. Like, it's more than just one little thing. It's going to take time. And last year we saw glimpses of hope. We saw glimpses of good, but we also saw glimpses of bad because we were so far in this hole. And so hopefully this year we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We'll just have to wait and see.
We saw it in the run game. And I think that was the first thing to get back to. And now that we don't have the quarterbacks that we had in the past that really weren't Tim's guys, I think we could see a significant jump. I'm not talking top 20 in college football in passing, but could we get into the 70-ish range, 60-ish range? I think it's possible. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. All right, let's end this show talking a little Ladell Betts, running backs coach for Iowa. Great running backs coach for Iowa. He has since going and moving off, going to the New York Giants. What are your thoughts on that?
Kind of shocking, really. It was reported, I think, just a few days or a day earlier that we had retained pretty much the whole coaching staff, and you even sent me that tweet, and you're like, this is actually kind of huge, and it is when you really think about it. You just listed off, how fortunate I think us fans and the Iowa program has been in the last how many years that Kirk's able to retain these guys and build a culture where everybody loves being there, right? But I'm not saying that that's the case with Ladell, and that's why he left. He got an opportunity in the NFL and as a running backs coach, like you said, for the Giants, and he took it. I mean, first off, that's awesome for him. That I'm sure he's had opportunities in the past, but to go to the NFL and be with a franchise like that, that's awesome. And so it sucks for us because the fact he's a great recruiter. He develops the running back position extremely well. Go look at Caleb Johnson. This guy turned himself into maybe the second or third best running back in the draft coming up here soon. So his ability to develop running backs and recruit running backs for Iowa is going to be missed for sure.
Yeah, I mean, think about like last year, being able to retain all three of the. I know LaShawn Williams ended up transferring like in the middle of the season, but think about going into last year, Jazz, LaShawn, Moulton, and Caleb. Like, we were like, there's no way all these guys stay, and they all stayed. And I think a lot of that reasoning was because of Ladell Betts. He was just a great coach. He had developed great relationships, obviously, with all these players. Great recruiter, like you mentioned, especially down in the Florida area. And he will be greatly missed. But I still think, though, it's a hire that Kirk can find a good replacement. I don't know if you're ever going to be able to replace Ladell right away, but I'm not too worried about it. It does suck, but like I said, it's not like the end of the world. I think losing a guy like LeVar Woods or Seth Wallace or Phil would be a little bit bigger of a deal. Obviously, I don't want to lose anybody, but if there's someone to lose, it's running backs coach, wide receivers coach, right? Because they're all replaceable pretty well. I just hope Kirk can, and really, to me, honestly, I think Kirk will let Lester kind of maybe not handpick it, but I think Lester will have a big say of who they're going to get and who they want. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think it's a big rush either. I don't think this will be a hire where we're going to see in the next week or two. I think it'll probably be a month. I think Kirk's going to kind of do his due diligence because I don't think there's any rush to get somebody. This isn't like getting an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator.
Even when it comes to the offensive coordinator position, it wasn't in a rush this last time. I guess that took it took a while. I think you're spot on that it'll be a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll probably be about a month. So I know spring ball starts March 25th, I believe. I think it starts, or 26th. So I would assume that they probably want to get somebody around that time. You would just think that that's what they would want to do, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So, that will do it for this episode. I think we kind of hit on a lot of things. I think now as we move forward, we've kind of took everything, and this is kind of why I wanted to do a podcast today about these topics, because we kind of look back on last year, kind of talked about the future. Now we can start kind of getting into more of next year's team. Yep. Spring ball is going to be around the corner, so we will have plenty of topics to talk about moving forward. We just won't take as big of a break in between like we just did. So, but yeah, that will do it for this episode. We'll be back shortly. Until then, have a good rest of your week and month of March, and go Hawks.